This is the Audio Apologetics blog, a ministry of Mama Bear Apologetics, bringing you the best apologetics articles and blogs from the web, but in audio format. Because let's face it, not everyone's a reader, and even if you are, sometimes you just don't have the time.
Today's article is titled 10 Problems with the Jesus Myth and Why It Matters, a guest post by Stephen J. Bedard on Jeff Clark's website, jeffkclark.com. 10 years ago, I co-wrote my first book entitled Unmasking the Pagan Christ. My friends were understandably excited for me. They asked me the natural question of what it was about. I explained the book demonstrated that the person and life of Jesus was not based on pagan myths, and that he was indeed a historical figure. There was silence. To my friends, writing a book on this was like trying to argue that fish like water. After all, everyone knows that Jesus is real, even if they don't believe he was the Son of God, or that he rose from the dead. Except not everyone believes this. There is something called the Jesus myth, a theory that has existed in some form or another since the 19th century. The basic argument is that Jesus never existed as a historical figure, and that the Jesus of the Gospels was just another version of other pagan gods, such as Horus, Dionysus, Mithras, etc. A form of the Jesus myth was found in Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, and the theory has become so popular that even ex-Christian and agnostic Bart Ehrman felt the need to respond to the theory. I have been researching the Jesus myth for 10 years and have seen the need to provide resources only grow. Even if many scholars see the Jesus myth as not worth responding to, the fact is that people are accepting this theory in growing numbers. 10 Problems with the Jesus Myth. Here are 10 problems with the Jesus myth that will hopefully help you to encourage those being troubled by it. Number 1. The rejection of the Gospels as historical sources. They are seen as faith documents and not modern biographies. That is true, but we do not have any unbiased ancient texts that meet the criteria of modern biography. If we reject the Gospels, we would also have to reject most of what we know about ancient history. Number 2. The claim that Paul never mentions the historical Jesus. This is simply not true. Paul quotes Jesus, mentions aspects of his life, and in 1 Corinthians 15, he challenges his readers to check out the surviving witnesses. Number 3. The rejection of Josephus as a testimony of Jesus. Some authors reject Josephus as evidence for Jesus, because it is clear that there is Christian tampering. Most scholars see an original core testimony that has been augmented by Christians, not created. Plus, we have what Josephus says about John the Baptist and James, the brother of Jesus. Number 4. The claim that Gnosticism was an equally original valid of Christianity, alongside what became Orthodox Christianity. The fact is that there is a clear continuity with our first-century Christian documents, as found in the New Testament, and what became Orthodox Christianity. Gnosticism, with its rejection of the Jewish God, Jewish scriptures, material world, and its focus on gnosis rather than sin, were a later, mid to late 2nd century, breakaway from Christianity. Number 5. The misuse of pagan myths. Many claims are made about the pagan myths by these authors, but when you look at the myths themselves, these claims are often not accurate. You are expected to rely on their secondary sources, and not to look at the primary sources. Number 6. Pagan myths are described in Christian language to strengthen their connection to Jesus. Mithras is said to be born of a virgin, even though he was born of a rock. Horus is said to be born of a virgin, even though he was conceived in the post-death intercourse of his married parents. Number 7. No respect for the dates of texts. Authors use pagan texts to establish connections to Jesus, but sometimes, as in the case of Mithras, the texts post-date the New Testament. How do we know that the pagans did not borrow from the Christians? Number 8. Use of post-biblical traditions. Authors demonstrate pagan influence on the 3 wise men, the ox and ass, December 25th, and a number of other traditions. The problem is that those are not biblical traditions. These things were added to the tradition later, and any pagan influence says nothing about the origins of the Jesus story. Number 9. Misunderstanding of pagan influence on art. There are valid examples of pagan influence on Christian art, such as Isis holding baby Horus, being used as a model for Mary holding baby Jesus. It makes sense that the new movement of Christianity would look beyond itself as it was developing its artistic side. This says nothing about pagan origins for the story. Number 10. The patchwork use of pagan myths. It is difficult to find large chunks of pagan myth that look like the Gospels. Jesus myth theorists take a word here and a phrase here from dozens of myths from many cultures and say, here is the Gospel. If you start with enough stories, you can reconstruct almost any historical figure, ancient or minor. Why do I share this? I have spoken with people who had been convinced by the Jesus myth, and yet when they were confronted with the evidence, they saw the truth of the historic Christian faith. There is plenty of room for disagreements among Christians, but the existence of Jesus is not negotiable. This article was 10 Problems with the Jesus Myth and Why It Matters by Stephen J. Bedard.
If your work has been featured on the Audio Apologetics blog and you'd like it removed, please send an email to askthemamabears@gmail.com.